So, before Tolkien, fantasy literature often consisted of fairy tales, folklore, and mythological stories, often aimed at children with a clear moral lessons. And it also wasn't recognized as a distinct genre, and fantasy was not considered serious literature by many people. So today on Book Talk, we're just going to be going over the evolution of fantasy from Tolkien to modern day fantasy. We're going to be looking at how Tolkien impacted the fantasy genre, how he made it basically serious literature for many people and shown it can be taken seriously, and how the subgenres kind of branched out from basically what he did with The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So, pre Tolkien fantasy included traditional fairy tales like those collected by the brothers Grimm and Andrew Lang, often featuring magical elements, fantastical creatures, and clear moral messages. Classical mythology, Norse sagas, and other foundational myths provide fertile ground for fantasy elements, but these were not always categorized as fantasy literature in the modern sense. Some authors like George MacDonald, William Morris, and Lord Dunsany wrote fantasy novels before Tolkien, exploring themes of other worlds, magic, and adventure. MacDonald's Fantasies, shown here, written in 1858, is often cited as one of the first modern fantasy novels. In the early 20th century, pulp magazines frequently showed fantasy stories, particularly sword and sorcery stories, such as Conan the Barbarian by Robert E. Howard. Tolkien's The Hobbit in 1937 and The Lord of the Rings, published 1954 and 1955, brought a new level of depth, world building, and sophisticated storytelling to the fantasy genre, often called high fantasy. His work popularized the genre and influenced countless subsequent writers. While fantasy existed before Tolkien, his work significantly shaped the modern fantasy genre, influencing its themes, settings, and narrative structures. So when you look into your favorite works, such as The Wheel of Time, the Game of Thrones, the Gunslinger series by Stephen King, it's very easy to pick out the little nuances in those works that were inspired by Tolkien. Stephen King, at the beginning of the Gunslinger series, even admits that the Gunslinger series is his attempt at a Lord of the Rings type of thing. The evolution of fantasy literature from Tolkien to modern works has seen a shift from epic, world spanning narratives to a broader range of subgenres and styles. While Tolkien's Lord of the Rings established many core elements and tropes of high fantasy, modern fantasy has expanded to include urban fantasy, dark fantasy, and much more, while also challenging and subverting those very tropes. The very first subgenre that derived from the Lord of the Rings trilogy with The Hobbit is called high fantasy. And Lord of the Rings is actually considered to be a high fantasy series. And the reason why is because it has a clear conflict between good and evil. It has a chosen hero, and it also has the quest narrative. High fantasy has all three of those aspects in there. So, to expand on high fantasy, The Lord of the Rings is set in a fully realized secondary world, Middle Earth, with its own history, cultures, and language. The story features epic conflicts between good and evil, explores moral themes, and includes a wide array of fantastical creatures and magical systems. Unlike low fantasy, which incorporates fantastical elements into our own world, The Lord of the Rings takes place entirely within Middle-earth, a world created by Tolkien with its own geography, history, and mythology. The story involves a grand quest to defeat the Dark Lord Sauron and prevent him from conquering Middle-earth, with far-reaching consequences for all its inhabitants. Tolkien's world is populated by various races like elves and dwarves and hobbits and the orcs that are trying to kill them, and features a rich tapestry of magic, including powerful artifacts like the One Ring and the magic of wizards like Gandalf. It has corrupting influence of power and the importance of courage and friendship and selflessness, and all in the face of adversity. The Lord of the Rings is widely recognized as a foundational text in the high fantasy genre, establishing many of the tropes and conventions that define the genre today. So Tolkien drew heavily from Norse mythology, Anglo-Saxon and Old English literature, and Finnish folklore. When crafting Lord of the Rings, he also incorporated elements of Greek mythology, Arthurian legends, and even some Christian theology, though aimed for pre-Christian feel. So let's break into a little bit more into the Norse mythology, the Anglo-Saxon mythology, and I'm just going to break that down for you and just let you know what Tolkien actually dipped his fingers in there to make the Lord of the Rings franchise. Tolkien's interest in Old Norse literature and language significantly shaped his world building. The name Middle-earth itself is actually an English translation of the Old Norse Myogaror. I have no idea if I pronounced that right. I probably butchered it. Many characters and creatures as well also have their parallels in Norse myths, such as Gandalf's resemblance to the Norse god Odin and Belrog's connection to the fire Jotun Surtur. I have no idea if I pronounced that right. And the destruction of Khazad Dûm, echoing the destruction of Bifrost Bridge in Northern mythology. Tolkien was a scholar of Old English, and he found inspiration in works like Beowulf. The epic poem's heroic themes and imagery influenced his portrayal of battles, characters, and the overall tone of The Lord of the Rings. The Kalevala, the Finnish national epic, had a profound impact on Tolkien. The magical item, the Sampo, which is fought over by opposing forces, shares thematic similarities with the One Ring. While not as prominent as Norse or Germanic influences, Tolkien was also familiar with Greek myths. There are some suggestions of parallels to the Greek myth of the Trojan War, particularly in the conflict between the quarrelsome, conceited Greeks and the Persian Empire. What a lot of people found were the themes of quest, fellowship, and the search of a powerful object in The Lord of the Rings resonate with the Arthurian legends, particularly the Grail quest and the Order of the Round Table. And though Tolkien did seek to create a pre-Christian mythology, his Catholic faith undoubtedly influenced his moral framework. Themes of good and evil and the nature of his deities, like the Valar or the Maiar, who draw from Christian angelology and aspects of polytheism. And his deep understanding of languages, particularly Old English and Old Norse, allowed him to create a rich linguistic landscape for Middle-earth, influencing the names of places, characters, and even the construction of his languages. The Lord of the Rings have also profoundly shaped the landscape of modern fantasy and literature and pop culture as well. It established many of the genre's conventions, including intricate world building, detailed maps and languages, and the concept of a secondary world, any world that is not our own. Which Middle Earth would be considered a secondary world because it's not the world we currently live in. He also gave Middle Earth, or the secondary world, its own history and culture. The novel popularized the quest narrative and introduced iconic fantasy races like elves, dwarves, orcs, which have become staples in the genre. You kind of look into anything, and let's say the Wheel of Time. A lot like the Trollocs, you can definitely tell that it took inspiration from those orcs. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and its detailed world, with its own history, mythology, and languages and cultures, portray races like elves, dwarves, and orcs, which significantly influence how these races are depicted in the literature and other media, like I stated. And Tolkien's concept of a fully realized fictional world distinct from our own, but with its own internal logic and history, has inspired countless authors to create their own secondary worlds, such as Stephen King's Gunslinger series, in which he even points out that it was very much inspired by The Lord of the Rings. So the series has a clear kind of conflict between versus evil, but it also explores moral ambiguity and the consequences of actions, particularly with magic as well. The One Ring, for example, offers great power, but it also brings corruption and temptation. Now, while the story does emphasize the importance of even the smallest individuals in the face of overwhelming evil, a theme that resonates with many readers today, it also goes over courage, friendship, and sacrifice, and a struggle against evil. And that continues to hold much relevance and appeal to readers, even in modern day fantasy. And the series has also had a massive impact on the gaming world, influencing development of Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games. And the success of Peter Jackson and the Lightning Thief brought Tolkien's work to a wider audience and further cementing its place in popular culture. In essence, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings not only defined high fantasy genre, but also provided a rich tapestry of characters, settings, and themes that continue to inspire writers and creators across various aspects of media. Now, modern fantasy has also very much diversified significantly since Tolkien, and it's moved beyond the medieval European settings and epic scope that characterized his work. While Tolkien's influence does remain strong, the genre has expanded to encompass a wider range of settings, themes, and character types, including those drawing inspiration from diverse cultures and exploring more complex and social as well as personal issues as well. And here's kind of a breakdown of how modern fantasy has diversified since Tolkien. Modern fantasy that you see today incorporates settings from various historical periods and cultures, including Asian, African, and other non European settings. Books like Guy Gavriel Kay's Under Heaven and Elizabeth Vonnerberg's Reign de Memoire demonstrate the diversification. Some authors blend elements from different cultures and time periods, creating a unique and very hybrid fantasy world. Fantasy that you see written today, whether it's by indie writers or traditionally published writers, it often features characters with more nuanced motivations and flaws, moving away from purely heroic or villainous archetypes. Themes of social justice, political conflict, and personal identity are increasingly explored within fantasy narratives. It's increasingly featuring characters in marginalized communities, including LGBTQ plus characters, characters of color, and characters with disabilities, reflecting a broader representation of society. The rise of female authors in fantasy, in my opinion, has led to more prominent and complex female characters, challenging the traditional gender roles. From the epic scope of Tolkien's world, modern fantasy has also seen a move toward the more intimate and personal narratives, exploring the impact of fantastical events on individual lives. It's also become more integrated with other genres like science fiction, horror, and romance, leading to hybrid subgenres and new storytelling possibilities. Urban fantasy, where fantastical elements intrude into modern cities, is an example of this blending. And while Tolkien's influence is still present, modern fantasy writers often engage with his work, reinterpreting or subverting his tropes to create new stories. Fantasy has also gained significant mainstream popularity through films, television series, and video games, reaching a wider audience than ever before. And because of this, the increased visibility has also led to a greater diversity of voices and perspectives within the genre. So while Tolkien's work remains foundational, modern fantasy has evolved into a vibrant and diverse genre, embracing a wider range of settings, themes, and characters and subgenres, and reflecting on the richness and complexity of the human experience. So, while Tolkien's work was popularized as high fantasy by its grand quests, magical medieval settings, and clearly defined heroes, other writers began exploring different approaches, which included low fantasy, incorporating fantastical elements into the real world, urban fantasy, setting fantastical stories in contemporary urban environments, or dark fantasy, blending fantasy and horror elements, and sword and sorcery, which focuses on individual heroes and their their action and adventure in a more pulpy style, often focusing on exotic settings. Writers today have kind of moved away from the medieval the European inspired setting and kind of included areas such as the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and other cultural traditions into their modern worlds. And it's kind of giving a unique, diversified experience, just like I've explained before, and it's creating quite the unique experience in the evolution of fantasy. While Tolkien's work often focused on grand world altering conflicts, later fantasy writers explored the more intimate stories, focusing on more personal journeys and relationships of characters within the fantastical world. This includes stories focused on character development, social webs, and the impact of magic on individuals and communities. Some authors actively subverted the tropes established by Tolkien, challenging the established conventions of the genre and exploring new possibilities within storytelling. They've been challenging traditional portrayals of races, magic systems, and character archetypes as well. Within the magic systems that they've created, well, Tolkien created a rich and detailed world. Later authors have developed even more complex and diverse magic systems, often drawing on real world mythology, philosophy, and scientific concepts. This includes exploring the nature of magic, its limitations, and its impact on the world and its inhabitants. The creation of fictional languages, as pioneered by Tolkien, has also become a significant aspect of world building as well. Tolkien's world, while rich and detailed, largely presented a clear distinction between good and evil, with heroes embodying virtue and villains representing darkness. Modern fantasy often explores moral gray areas, where characters are flawed, conflicted, and driven by self interest and desperation. Authors like Joe Abercrombie, with his grimdark subgenre, deliberately challenged Tolkien's heroic ideals by depicting a world where violence, betrayal, and political machinations are commonplace. Characters in these narratives are often aware of their own flaws and hypocrisies, contrasting with the more idealized figures of Tolkien's works. While Tolkien's villains often had straightforward motivations like world domination, modern fantasy frequently delves into the complexities of antagonists. Authors like to explore motivations behind villainy, sometimes portraying them as products of circumstance, trauma, or even understandable grievances. This shift moves away from the simplistic good versus evil narratives and encourages readers to consider the nuances of conflict and the potential for empathy even with those on the opposing side. Now, when it comes to archetypes, Tolkien established many iconic fantasy archetypes, such as the wise old wizard, the brave knight, and the noble elf. Modern fantasy writers often subvert these archetypes, presenting characters who are not always what they seem or who challenge the traditional expectations associated with their roles. For example, a wizard might be manipulative and self serving, or a knight might be driven by personal ambition rather than a sense of duty. Tolkien's works often feature epic quests with a clear objective and a defined path to victory. Modern fantasy might incorporate quest narratives, but it often complicates or subverts them. The quest might be fraught with unexpected challenges, moral dilemmas, or even lead to unforeseen consequences. Some authors might question the very nature of the quest itself, exploring the psychological and social impact of such a journey on the participants. While Tolkien's world building was extensive, modern fantasy often delves deeper into the political and social structures of the fictional world. Authors explore themes of power, governance, and the interactions between races and cultures. This can involve examining the consequences of political decisions, the struggle for power, and the impact of conflict on societies. In essence, while Tolkien's influence on fantasy literature is undeniable, modern fantasy writers have expanded the genre's horizons by challenging his established tropes, exploring more complex themes, and offering diverse perspectives on the human and fantastical condition. So that's basically how the fantasy genre has evolved from Tolkien to modern day. Tolkien with his Lord of the with the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it's very, when it comes to political and intrigue and psychology and everything else that I've mentioned, it's very basic, very simple, and at times it can even come across as predictable, and it's not really diversified at all. It's kind of diverse when it comes, but just because he kind of dipped into Norse mythology and Greek mythology, and he kind of dipped into different cultures, but it's done to a much greater extent in modern fantasy. So that's been the video. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to it if you haven't already subscribed to my videos. Let me know what you think about it, and also give me a few examples of some fantasy books or series that you feel have underlined the diversification in fantasy today.